The massacre at Island Magee in 1641 is a little-known but deeply significant event in Irish history. During a single night, 30 Catholics, men, women and children, were brutally killed by a Scottish garrison and local English settlers. This act of violence unfolded in the midst of one of Ireland's most turbulent periods, the Irish Rebellion of 1641 and the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. Though relatively small in scale compared to other atrocities of the time, the massacre at Island Magee is emblematic of the sectarian hatred and colonial ambitions that defined this era. It is also a reminder of the human cost of fear, revenge, and unchecked power. To understand what happened that night, and why, requires a deep dive into the complex historical and social forces that shaped 17th-century Ireland. The roots of the Island Magee massacre can be traced to the early 17th century, following the defeat of Gaelic Irish chieftains in the 9 Years' War, 1594 to 1603. The loss of leaders like Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, marked the end of Gaelic Ireland as a cohesive political entity. The Treaty of Mellifont, 1603, signalled the beginning of a new era of English dominance, but the peace was short-lived. The flight of the Earls in 1607, when O'Neill and other Gaelic lords left Ireland for continental Europe, created a power vacuum in Ulster. The English crown capitalised on this opportunity by implementing the Plantation of Ulster. This plantation aimed to colonise the region by settling English and Scottish Protestants on lands confiscated from the Catholic Irish. It was one of the largest and most transformative colonial endeavours in Irish history. The plantation was more than just a land redistribution scheme. It was an effort to replace Irish Catholic culture with Protestant and English norms. New settlers introduced different farming techniques, a legal system based on English common law, and Protestant religious practices. These changes were alien to the native Irish, who viewed the settlers not only as economic competitors but also as cultural usurpers. The demographic changes were dramatic. Ulster, once the heartland of Gaelic Ireland, became a patchwork of Protestant enclaves surrounded by dispossessed Catholic populations. This demographic imbalance fostered resentment, mistrust, and a sense of alienation among the Irish, who saw their land, traditions, and autonomy stripped away. Religion deepened the divides. The Protestant settlers, many of whom were Presbyterian Scots, viewed their Catholic neighbours with suspicion and disdain. To them, Catholicism represented allegiance to the Pope and a potential threat to their security. The native Irish, in turn, saw Protestantism as an alien faith imposed by foreign occupiers. This mutual distrust was reinforced by discriminatory laws favouring Protestants. Catholics were excluded from political power, faced restrictions on property ownership, and were subjected to heavy fines for practising their religion. These systemic inequities set the stage for the explosive violence that would erupt in 1641. The Irish Rebellion of 1641 began as a coordinated effort by Catholic leaders to address their community's grievances. Their goals included halting the plantation process, restoring land to dispossessed Irish families, and achieving greater political and religious freedoms. However, what began as a political movement quickly devolved into widespread violence. In Ulster, Catholic insurgents targeted Protestant settlers with ferocity. The rebellion unleashed years of pent-up anger, as Irish Catholics attacked those they saw as occupiers. Thousands of Protestants were killed or forced to flee, often under horrific circumstances. The violence was shocking in its scale and brutality, creating a sense of existential threat among the Protestant population. Protestant accounts of the rebellion, often exaggerated for political purposes, played a crucial role in shaping perceptions of the conflict. Stories of massacres, rapes, and other atrocities circulated widely in England and Scotland, fueling outrage and calls for retribution. These accounts portrayed the Irish as barbaric and untrustworthy, reinforcing the idea that Protestants needed to act decisively to protect themselves. These narratives also created a moral justification for acts of revenge, including the massacre at Island Magee. The garrison at Carrickfergus, influenced by these accounts, likely saw their actions as a necessary response to the atrocities committed by Catholics elsewhere. By early 1641, Ulster was a land consumed by fear and chaos. The Protestant settlers and garrisons, though well armed, were vastly outnumbered by the Catholic population. Every rumour of rebellion or attack heightened their sense of vulnerability. It was in this climate of paranoia and mistrust that the decision to attack the Catholics of Island Magee was made. Island Magee, a narrow peninsula in County Antrim, was home to a small, mixed population of Catholics and Protestants. Its location near Belfast Lough made it strategically significant during the rebellion. The Scottish garrison at nearby Carrickfergus, tasked with protecting Protestant settlements, kept a wary eye on the peninsula's Catholic residents. As news of Catholic atrocities elsewhere in Ulster spread, tensions in the area reached a boiling point. Protestant settlers and soldiers began to view the local Catholic population as a potential threat, regardless of whether they had participated in the rebellion. In early 1641, under the cover of darkness, the Scottish garrison and local Protestant settlers launched a raid on the Catholic residents of Island Magee. Over 30 people were killed in the attack. Victims included men, women, and children, who were dragged from their homes and slaughtered without mercy. Houses were burned, and the dead were left as grim warnings to others. The massacre was swift and brutal, designed not only to punish but also to intimidate. It sent a clear message: Catholics were not safe, even if they had no direct involvement in the rebellion. The massacre at Island Magee was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of sectarian violence. Acts of brutality often occurred in cycles, as one atrocity fueled another. The attackers likely saw themselves as avengers, delivering justice for the Protestant lives lost during the rebellion. However, their actions perpetuated the very cycle of fear and hatred they sought to escape. In the broader context of the rebellion, the massacre at Island Magee was relatively small. Other atrocities, such as the massacres of Protestants at Portadown or the Cromwellian siege of Drogheda, overshadowed the deaths on the peninsula. As a result, the event received little attention in contemporary accounts. Additionally, Protestant narratives of the rebellion focused on Catholic violence, often ignoring or minimizing atrocities committed by their own side. This selective memory allowed events like the Island Magee massacre to fade from the historical record. The perpetrators of the massacre likely faced no consequences for their actions. In the chaotic environment of the rebellion, justice was rarely served, especially when the victims were members of a marginalized community. This lack of accountability contributed to the normalization of violence and reinforced the divisions between Catholics and Protestants. Unlike larger events that were recorded in detail, the Island Magee massacre left few written records. This absence has contributed to its relative obscurity, though its memory has survived in oral traditions and local histories. The lack of documentation also reflects the broader marginalization of Catholic voices in 17th-century Ireland. The massacre at Island Magee illustrates how fear and hatred can lead to the dehumanization of entire communities. The attackers saw their Catholic neighbors not as individuals, but as representatives of an enemy group. This dehumanization justified acts of extreme violence, allowing the perpetrators to view themselves as protectors rather than aggressors. The events at Island Magee were not isolated but part of a long history of sectarian conflict in Ireland. They reveal the deep scars left by colonialism, displacement, and religious discrimination. These divisions would persist for centuries, shaping the trajectory of Irish history and contributing to later conflicts. In modern times, the massacre has become part of broader efforts to confront Ireland's troubled past. Acknowledging the suffering experienced by all communities is essential for building a more inclusive understanding of history. Events like Island Magee remind us of the importance of empathy and the dangers of forgetting the lessons of the past. The massacre at Island Magee in 1641 is a stark reminder of the destructive power of division. It reveals the human cost of fear, hatred, and unchecked power, while also highlighting the resilience of communities that endure such tragedies. By remembering the victims and examining the causes and consequences of the violence, we honor their humanity and learn valuable lessons about the dangers of sectarianism. Understanding events like Island Magee is not just an academic exercise but a moral imperative, one that challenges us to build a future where such tragedies are never repeated.